After Lawson's Bluff, the trail continues along the northwest shore of Sucia Island. The trail continues northwards towards Ewing's Cove. However, we decided that we weren't going to go all the way to Ewing's Cove and elected to just follow along the coast until the trail turned up towards Echo Bay. This is the last view you have of the northwest coast, so I lingered a little bit before I turned and followed Tim and Paul into the peninsula between Echo Bay and Shallow Bay. As we hiked on this trail, we saw several trail runners, and it appears to be a favorite spot of people who want to do some adventure trail running. I find that very, very amazing. We continued on our way on the trail over the top of the peninsula between Shallow Bay and Echo Bay, and soon we arrived at the shore of Echo Bay. We emerged from the forest along the north side of the cove and saw a spectacular sight. From this opening in the forest, we had a commanding view of the bay. On one side, we saw a dinghy in the water, and surprisingly, there was a origami kayak. The owners exploring the island much like we were. Once we reached the Echo Bay, there was an interesting sea caves along the southern side of this peninsula. Because it was low tide, I was able to explore these sea caves by foot, but obviously these were carved by wave action during high tide. Deep in the cave, you could see sticks and sand, obviously from water carving this cave, and also remnants of water in the cave as we looked out. The second cave had a similar appearance with sand going into the cave all the way to the back. But the back of the cave had an interesting pattern of algae growth, indicating that the water level was a little bit higher in this cave and more constant. So this was an extremely low tide. Echo Bay is the largest of the bays on Sucia Island. And while it is the largest, it is also the most exposed. But being the largest bay, you have a lot more privacy in between boats along the moorings. In fact, in 2018, Neil Young and Daryl Hannah got married on a yacht in this bay. And it was a total surprise. This is Mount Baker, and then along the side of this bay are the Finger Islands. And the Finger Islands are kind of interesting because the Finger Islands are privately owned, but there is one island there called Justice Island, and it got its name in a very unusual way. In the 1980s, a group of smugglers purchased this island with the purpose of smuggling in marijuana. What could go wrong? This island was uninhabited, the area during the winter totally devoid of anybody around. This would be a perfect place to stash your marijuana and smuggle it in slowly into the United States. Unfortunately, they didn't count on what would happen during the summer when there were a whole bunch of people and rangers in Echo Bay, and they were soon discovered. The island was then reclaimed by the state of Washington and renamed Justice Island. As we continued down on the hike, we came across this interesting structure. There was a building that was listed as a utility building. It's interesting in that it had a stone wall with a wooden roof and a small vent on the top. But what was its purpose? Here's a building that has no doors, no windows, and what was it used for? Obviously it had a fence, but Still couldn't figure out what it was used for. Anyway, Paul and Tim decided that they had enough of this hike and they headed back to campsite on Fossil Bay. I decided that I wanted to continue on to Johnson Point. So they left and I continued on the trail. The trail was well demarcated and rather interior, and you see through the branches you could see Snoring Bay. But I continued on and just kept going. Eventually the trail opened up to a prairie where I could see the ocean and Snoring Bay. Snoring Bay basically is a cove between Johnson Point and Wiggins Head on the other side. On the other side of Wiggins Head is Fossil Bay. Essentially, Wiggins Head is an island because its only attachment is this small stretch of sand between Johnson Point and Wiggins Head. Eventually I descended out of the forest into Johnson Point, and I got a sweeping view of Orcas Island and Matia Island, sometimes known as Misha. And if you look, you can see that there were some kayakers in the ocean using another interesting kayak, an inflatable kayak. The currents were strong and it looks like they were having a difficult time paddling against the current, but they seem to be making good progress. On Johnson Point, there were also fossils, and the fossil of a driftwood millions of years ago was discovered on this point. It also looked like one of the more unstable areas of the island, and as you can see, huge landslides. So you had to be kind of careful. You don't want to come too close to the edge in this area. In Hawaii, when you see a monument like this, you think of a fisherman who fell into the ocean while fishing. In reality, this monument was created by Deputy Mineral Surveyor Reginald Thompson. It marked the beginning of the survey of the Sucia Island mineral stone mines in 1892. The area surveyed was all the way from Echo Bay to Fossil Bay, and apparently the mining of the sandstone went from 1890, when it was surveyed, all the way to 1908, and the stones from Sucia Island were used in Seattle for pavement purposes. Meanwhile, our intrepid paddlers in the inflatable followed along the coast, heading towards Fossil Bay. It almost looked like they were paddling into Snoring Bay first in order to avoid the currents. Later that evening, when I returned to Fossil Bay, they paddled in through Fossil Bay and then carried their kayak over to Fox Cove. They said that they were going to paddle to Pecos Island that evening, and I was hoping they wouldn't, because it would have been a pretty rough paddle. After Johnson Point, I took the trail back to our campsite in Fossil Bay. In this scene, you see the back part of Snoring Bay, and it's the mud flats. On the right side, you see Wiggins Head, and on the left side, you see the hike to Johnson Point. It's called the mud flats for a very good reason. It's muddy, and when I made the mistake of trying to walk on it, it's almost like walking on quicksand, so I don't recommend you walk on it at all. Have you ever felt like you wanted to own a piece of Sucia Island? Well, here's your opportunity. In mud flats, on the middle of our scene here, is Hardin Island. Hardin Island has an A-frame barn that you can put camping gear in, and It's a privately owned island that you can purchase. I saw it on the internet. If you have $777,000 in your pocket to burn, you too can own an island, a private island on Sucia Island. Just off of Herndon or Harnden Island is the other dock that you can dock your boat to, other than the one in Fossil Bay. The difference is that this is a further walk to campsites in Fossil Bay. Some people prefer that because it's a little bit more away from the crowds. You decide. Going past the mud flats, we finally arrive at our destination, our campsite at Fossil Bay. It was a great hike, just one of several really nice hikes on the Sucia Island. And I really recommend that you do this hike. It's not that hard to do. You get to see a lot of sights. And if you can't paddle, like we couldn't paddle to Mesha on this day, it was a really good substitute. Thanks for watching, and aloha.
Well, I know the Carlisle is mine.
I showed it to I showed it to
I have no idea.
mentioned that.
I gotta ask her. Kevin stole your paddle.
Oh, is that your
The
paddle?
Carlisle? Better give it back.
Oh, is that your paddle?
Did you put one of these in that red?
No.
It's a single, right?